It all started out so simple. All the great governments around the universe were looking into ways of combining their energy sources, trying to streamline them, finding a way to make sure they can make them more efficient, working on any possible discovery to see if there was any way that they could use each other's technologies to assist each other. This was a simple test, that was all. The mistake happened when they combined all three engines together. They didn't match up, they didn't sync, and before they knew it, a mistake had been made. A mistake that opened a rift to a previously unknown dimension. What was even stranger is this same mistake had pulled them towards a particular sector in this dimension. Usually that doesn't happen. They were confused and investigated why this was going on, and suddenly what seemed like a second pulse came from a certain planet. They locked on to that strange blue sphere that was there, and immediately recognized something. There was a satellite around it. It almost looked like it was a moon, but it sure enough was a satellite. They all recognized it. This was an old decommissioned watch station, but this was very odd. They're usually in pairs, and yet there's only one of them, the larger one. Normally, the pair shows up, scans the planet for about a century, and then moves on to another planet collecting data. They wondered if this station had called out when they scanned the sector, but it can't do that. Can it? They thought for a moment, and there's possibility that there was some sort of echo coming from this satellite, this station, that could be confused as its own planetoid. They began to scan around and check the planet, check also around the sector, checked everything. And the strange thing was, there was an odd pulse. Something resonated from the nearby planet. But it took a while for them to actually get through that. Though they couldn't move their scanners from this area, they were trying to figure out what was going on. As they did, they realized that there was something off here. Something that they didn't fully realize. They were going to have to call someone. Someone they didn't want to call unless they absolutely had to. The word went out. Contact the Guardian Order. They needed assistance from the fourth great power, even though it was the smallest of the four great powers with only 4 dimensions under its own guardianship. The Guardian Order was the most technologically advanced. They did this by making sure they were not involved in the conflicts and more served as referees, and also made sure that technology would be shared with them from every single group. It didn't matter if it was from the unified republics with their 6 dimensions of governments, the allied empires of the universe with 5 dimensions under their belt, or the coalition of unaligned worlds with 9 full dimensions. Even with all this, there were still disputes, and the Guardian Order was always called to settle the disputes before war broke out. They already know what had happened because half a dimension was almost utterly obliterated in a conflict between the United Republics and the Allied Empires of the universe. They didn't need to do this again. The treaty after that conflict demanded that the Guardian Order be shown and explained all new technologies, and in return, the Order will stay out of all galactic disputes unless they are contacted directly, or the threat of a species' full annihilation or the annihilation of a dimension is perceived likely. Everyone is very hesitant to contact the Order as they know what the Guardian Order can do. After the call, it doesn't take long at all for the ships to arrive at the testing station. Far too fast for anyone else to be really happy about this, as it shows the technological superiority of the Guardian Order itself. The ships arriving made everybody raise their pucker factor by more than 20 times as much. Not because Guardian ships jumped in, no, but because there was so many. From the smallest Alpha and Gamma ships that were only 370 meters long, 150 meters wide, and 108 tall, all the way to a massive Anubis class, coming in at 3,220 meters long, 600 meters wide, and 760 meters tall. Along with that was another half a dozen different classes in between them, and this spooked everybody because usually the Guardian Order doesn't show up in groups this large, especially knowing how powerful these ships truly are. Even the smallest ones can take on a home fleet and usually win by themselves. They might not get away unscathed, but they're definitely going to win. Everyone was confused as they looked. Why so many ships? This doesn't make any sense. Why would the Guardian Order send so many, and then they got the worst surprise that they could have gotten? The Guardian Sage himself had arrived. The Guardian Sage held absolute authority over the Order, and everybody knew it. Everyone knew with simple wave of his finger he can order fleets of massive ships to go in and just destroy everybody. However, the Guardian has a very high aversion to conflict. Everybody watched as the Guardian fleet moved silently through the void. Everybody looked at the ships very close, and everyone could see that the gun ports were closed. And as they were, they could see that those ships looked as though they were built in sections. For the untrained eye, it would almost look there was like a giant spine floating through space, taking out all the moving parts and just compressing it down. It looks almost like segments of bone, continuing all the way down from the point of the bow all the way to the large engine area that left absolutely no thrust. Everyone realized that this was the gravimetrics, but they always assumed that it was much, much better than the types they were using right now. Inside the segments, everybody knew the destructive weapons that were there, hidden by the segments and the layers of shielding that are near impossible to penetrate, even by the best weapons that every single species has. Once the shuttle left the Anubis-class ship, the Guardian Sage himself walked into the area where the experiment had taken place. Everybody looked strange at him as the robe was draped down all the way to the floor and covering his face. On either side, he was flanked by others with robes, but they were also bringing along different grav-lift technology. Crates upon crates of electronics were being brought in, mostly to study everything. As the Guardian Sage reached the console where the experiment was being taken place, many of those that had conducted the experiment were trying to actually explain what was going on. Before they could do anything, the Guardian Sage simply raised a hand, and everyone quieted. With a twist of his hand, all the others scattered out and began to remove their robes, exposing the face and the fact that they were completely covered in tools. The biosuits that they wore allowed them to interface with most technologies and also kept them going for a very long time without having to stop. Everyone knew this. Everyone in the Guardian Order was very, very quiet and usually simply walked up to one of the engineers that had worked and simply said, "Please explain." And that's when the Guardian Sage pulled his hood back and said the same. "Please explain," he said as he moved his arms wide. They began to explain how they were simply trying to streamline their technology using others, and there was some sort of cross with the different energies that was going. And surprisingly, they had found another dimension. They didn't know it was there. Math suggested that it wasn't there, yet here it is, right in front of them. They didn't understand how this would happen, and that is why they contacted the Guardian Sage and the Order to make sure they knew what the hell was going on, because they were completely lost. Even chaos math wasn't explaining this, so they needed something. The Guardian Sage looked, and they could see through the portal towards this blue ball in the middle of the ether. The sensors were reading that there was signals from the other dimension, 6 of them actually. 6 different ones that came out systematically, one right after the other. They didn't understand why. It seemed as though they had to wait a full solar cycle of this planet before it came out. and it seemed as though the planet adjusted each time. It was strange. Even the guardian sage was slightly confused, but he tried not to show it. It was very odd that they had not found this dimension before. It's like it had been willed into existence the moment they looked at it. This piqued everybody's interest, especially the sage himself, as he is always interested in finding something new. He wanted to warp his ships in, and he tried to get that to work. However, there was a major problem. Inside this dimension, the magnetic and gravitational interference would make it impossible for the ships to arrive safely. Chances are, even as good as the Guardian's Order ships are, they would simply be pulled in so many different directions. Either the ship itself would be pulled apart, or they'd hit a gravity well so hard that everyone inside, regardless of the inertial dampeners, would be crushed against the bulkhead, and everyone would just look like paste against the wall. Even if the computers were able to record it, they wouldn't record anyone getting up, but instead watch as everyone's entrails turn into sludge and splash on the floor. Due to this, the research simply had to continue. More and more and more, and this took precedence, so much so that everyone began to bring their best ships and their best personnel there. The Guardian Order was actually surprised that everyone else had folks that were well versed in things of this nature. Yet it stands to reason that they would not sit on their hands or tentacles or whatever it might be. They would want to look into things themselves. Normally, this would be brought up as being against the treaty, but for the moment, everyone just wanted to figure out how they could go into this new dimension. Eventually, they discovered something. They didn't quite understand it at first, but it seems as though there was different energy lines that went across the blue planet. Sometimes they would cross each other because they were not going directly north-south or east-to-west parallel to each other, but instead they crossed each other at different points, seemingly random, but it was there. This energy link between these two sources crossing was the key. It would allow wormholes to be temporarily opened. However, there was another issue. These wormholes, these gateways, would not be open for very long at all, a few minutes at best. And they wouldn't be more than, say, the size of their own people. You'd have to rush equipment through. They wouldn't be able to get heavy equipment through either. They need to bring everything they're going to need along to try and make another gate, some sort of relay, anything they could to make sure that they can return home. And when the Guardian Sage said he would go himself, immediately everyone turned and screamed, "No! Sir, no!" Immediately, the Guardian Sage realized their concerns. Nobody had to tell him, even though everyone told him extensively, that if the Guardian Sage is lost, all of the 23 dimensions will go into chaos. The Guardian Sage has been around for over 10,000 years. Without him, the Order falls, and soon everyone else. Due to this fact, the Guardian Sage asked for volunteers, and many of the Sage's children volunteered for this seemingly one-way trip. At first, the Guardian Sage was immediately hesitant to let any of his children go, even though he has so many of them after being around so long. He knew that there was the different species. He didn't know if they'd be able to manage themselves on that planet. They didn't know what was going to meet them on the other side. All they had was a strange visual reference, and not a good one either. It was very blurry. He was sad at the thought of maybe losing them, but he did give his blessing as all of them began to demand, not request, but demand to go. They needed to reach out. They needed to do something beyond the Order, many of these being young, under 1800 years old. They still had their sense of adventure. They didn't want to stay stuck in a laboratory, stuck on a ship, stuck anywhere. They wanted to go out and see this new dimension for themselves. So the Guardian Sage agreed, saddened by the thought, but he did give his blessing. They eventually were able to open the wormhole generator, which proved absolutely the most difficult thing anyone has ever done. It seems as though to jump into this dimension, to get through all the interference and everything else, they needed a lot of power. Power that they didn't even know they could generate. Eventually, they siphoned off an entire star to get enough power, and that still wasn't enough. They were able to maintain that power, but not very long, as they got another star and siphoned it off as well. This was something nobody ever thought was going to be ever needed, and now they hope they would never have to do it again, because that took out 2 entire sectors from being habitable. Even though you maintain several dimensions, this is an incomprehensible loss. But it did work. As the guardian sage watched all the wormholes open, he realized they would be all over the planet itself, and he watched as his children left, most of them not even waving, knowing they had only a few minutes at best to make sure they could get there. They simply ran through the portal themselves. He watched with sadness and joy, as every parent should, as they struck out on their own. He watched as all the equipment was pushed through, shoved through, drove through. It didn't matter. They wanted to get as much through as possible, but it didn't take more than a minute or two before you could see the portal begin to collapse and begin to shrink itself smaller and smaller and smaller, till eventually it was too dangerous for them to even try to get through, but still others tried to shove crates through, crates of anything they could, food, water, medicine, any type of electronics. One even dove through, almost getting his tail cut off as he went through. And then it closed. At that point, they realized they could not see anything closer than the busted satellite that was around this blue ball. At that point, they could only do one thing, and sometimes it is the hardest thing to do for anyone. They had to wait. They had to wait until the expedition contacted them, found a way to get through the interference, found a way to do anything, let them know they're alive, even something as a simple elemental code, something. But now they simply had to wait. What they waited for might change everything. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me on today's chapter with a story that was initially sent in by the Guardian Sage. Hope you enjoy it because there's more parts to come. Before I go, I need to send out a few more thank yous to my supporters, and those would be Erica Gem, MTF Guard, Sir, Guardian Sage, SS Demon, Chris Dixon, Brian Kemp, and Coslin. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I will see you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.